My sisters and brothers, the Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to the Lord.
Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them. From the cloud came a voice, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. The Gospel of the Lord.
Our readings today, the first and the second in particular, have a great similarity. It's really a story about 2 fathers and 2 sons, God the Father and his Son Jesus, Abraham, our father in faith, his son Isaac. And it's a story about 2 fathers who were willing to sacrifice their sons, God the Father sending Jesus on mission to ultimately die on the cross for us. Abraham, as an elderly man, he and his wife never having children, finally receiving a son, willing to sacrifice his son because God asked him to do so. And it's a story about 2 sons who were actually very willing to be sacrificed. It would be a mistake to think that Jesus was forced to die on the cross. He freely laid his life down. He knew the suffering ahead of him. We'll be reminded of that Holy Thursday and Good Friday as we hear the words of Jesus' prayer in the agony in the garden. "Father, if this cup can pass me by, please let it pass me by, but your will be done, not my own." He freely chose Isaac too. Sometimes maybe we think that, it was against his will that Abraham was sacrificing him, but if you think for a moment, Abraham was 100 years old. Isaac was a young, strong teenager. He could have taken his father if he wanted to. There's no doubt in my mind that he had the strength to do that, to fight, but we hear no resistance at all. He willingly knew and was to accept God's will to be the sacrifice. Both Isaac and Jesus carried the wood of the sacrifice. Both carried it up a mountain, and on top of that mountain they were to be sacrificed. Isaac, the altar, the wood of the sacrifice. Jesus carrying the wood of the cross. A story about 2 fathers, 2 sons. The willingness of both father and son to sacrifice. This Lenten day, really the question for each one of us, are you willing to be sacrificed? Am I willing to be sacrificed? And what exactly are we willing to sacrifice within our lives? Important question. I'm going to guess for pretty much all of us in church, not one of us will be called to sacrifice our very physical life to be martyred for Christ and the gospel. but yet it's going on this very minute in the world, especially in the Middle East. Our brothers and sisters, Christians in Syria, being beheaded because they are Christians. Our brothers and sisters, children, being crucified through the Middle East because of faith. And yet we don't hear that much about it in the media, and we don't hear much about world governments stepping in to stop this. Some are still today called to sacrifice their very life, not to renounce their faith in Christ, but prefer death rather than renounce their faith. For you, for me, we probably won't have to do that. But yet the call of sacrifice still exists for us all. So what are you willing to sacrifice? Perhaps the sacrifice is the sacrifice of your pride, to truly become humble, to go and extend forgiveness to someone who asks, maybe to go and extend forgiveness to someone who is in need of asking us, but we choose not even to wait for that and go out of our way to extend it. Maybe it's a conquering of pride, a sacrifice of pride to humble ourselves, to go and ask someone else to forgive us, especially if it's been a long-term hurt. Maybe that is the sacrifice this Lent. Maybe the sacrifice is that of time and activities. I sense in our world we are all very, 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 very busy, running around everywhere. Maybe we need to sacrifice some of the things we do and use that time in other fashion. One of my friends I admire very much, they have 4 children, and each of the children are allowed to pick one and only one thing to do all year. You want to play football? Great, that's your one thing all year. You want to be in the school musical? Great, that's your one thing all year. And the children have had to sacrifice multiple activities at the same time. But you know what that sacrifice has brought? They actually get to eat dinner together at a normal hour, pretty much every day. Almost unheard of today. Maybe the sacrifice is some facade or some image of ourselves that we try to portray. Maybe that's the sacrifice. I'm not sure if I shared the story with you back when we were going to the not March for Life, but the Life Chain in October. When I was doing that back at Our Lady of Pompeii the first year, inviting everyone as I invited you to join us, one man came to me and he said, I do not want you to misunderstand why I'm not with you. He said, I do not believe in abortion. I do believe in protecting human life. He said, but I'm in business. And if any of my customers should see me standing on Niagara Falls Boulevard holding that sign, and they have an opinion different than that, I could lose their business. He was being called to sacrifice a facade and a self-image. Maybe that's what we're being called to this Lent ourselves. Maybe the sacrifice is that of finances, to really become even more generous. Lent is a time we focus on that, especially at Catholic Charities, and to be generous to the point that it hurts a little. One of my priest friends very rarely goes on vacation. And he doesn't go on vacation that often because he can't afford it. And he can't afford it because he has made the decision that if he is going on vacation, he adds up what the vacation costs and he writes a check to charities for the exact same amount. So the cost of his vacation is really multiplied by 2 because he will not afford that luxury in his life if he cannot help someone else afford to simply live. Maybe that sacrifice is one of finance. Maybe it's simply to be willing to stand for our faith, to make the calls, to write the letters to our elected officials about the issues that really go against our faith in the world today, to write the letters, to make the calls, to question what are we doing as an American people for the Christians who are dying in the Middle East? What are we doing for them? To make the calls, to write the letters, to defend the definition of marriage as the Supreme Court is approaching that decision. Maybe it's the ongoing battle of when life begins for us at the moment of conception, the way God intended it to be. Maybe it's to be willing to sacrifice, to allow our name to actually be attached to our belief, and to speak that to those who are in political position to make a difference. The list can go on and on and on, but perhaps this day reflect what is it that you're being called to sacrifice yourself in order to allow that sacrifice to really be freely chosen. And once we really sacrifice, then we can understand the gospel. The transfiguration today is the gospel. You know, the apostles sacrificed. They gave up their businesses, they gave up their families to follow Jesus. It was after that sacrifice and being with Jesus, they realized what was going on top of that mountain. They had a key experience of God. And the same is true for us. We have to sacrifice in order to open ourselves up to understand God. You know, our teenagers who are going to be confirmed this April, went on retreat. It was their first group who had to do the overnights. And it was a sacrifice. Many of their parents, some of our teenagers themselves, were not too thrilled over the idea. They had to sacrifice their time. They had to sacrifice other things in order to go. And yet once we were there and finished the retreat, there was not one of them who complained about anything we did. And when we were in time of adoration and prayer the evening of the first day, so many of our teenagers said to me, I've never experienced God inside of me like I did during that time of adoration. They needed to sacrifice to open themselves up in order to experience the intimacy of God. Maybe if you've ever felt that we kind of go through the motions of faith, maybe if you ever feel, well, God is kind of out there, but it's not hitting me, I don't get it. Maybe it's really a call first to sacrifice in the name of Christ and the gospel, and in so doing, open yourself up to truly experience the life, the intimacy, the joy, the love of Christ and the gospel.